premierships.
Why am I going to vote? Because that's what my rabbis tell me to do, and that's what I'm going to do.
Who would you like as the next Prime Minister?
I guess Netanyahu, that's what the rabbis say.
Hello, welcome to the programme. In the last hour, the current Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has addressed his supporters, saying he's still awaiting the official results from the general election. Exit polls suggest there is no clear winner, but the indications are it will be much harder for Mr Netanyahu to build a governing coalition, bringing to an end his long run as Prime Minister. But he said he would work towards establishing what he called a strong Zionist government. From Tel Aviv, the BBC's Jeremy Bowen reports.
Israeli TV exit polls showed no decisive victory for any side. The votes will be counted through the night, but it could take weeks of coalition horse trading before the next government and Prime Minister emerge. The election has been a referendum on Benjamin Netanyahu's last 10 years in office. He's Israel's longest-serving Prime Minister. His main rival is retired General Benny Gantz from the Blue and White Party. Some of his supporters fear he was politically naive not to press harder on corruption charges faced by Mr. Netanyahu, which the Prime Minister denies. In opposition strongholds in Tel Aviv, queues of voters were waiting and hoping to end Mr. Netanyahu's political career. What's wrong with Netanyahu?
Everything. What's not wrong with him? He's corrupted. He hates everyone. He rules on fear. He's too much right-wing.
But Mr. Netanyahu has reliable support from ultra-religious Israelis who have their own political parties. Just before the vote, they rallied in Jerusalem. In exchange for privileges for their community, they've supported Mr. Netanyahu's premierships.
Why am I going to vote? Because that's what my rabbis tell me to do, and that's what I'm going to do.
Who would you like as the next Prime Minister?
I guess Netanyahu, that's what the rabbis say.
The power of the ultra-religious has become one of Israel's most divisive issues. Mr. Netanyahu was, as usual, a formidable campaigner, even starring in his own commercials. In this one, he puts hikers back on the right track, while losers follow untrustworthy guides named after his opponents. Israelis have been offered more personal insults than policy debates. Mr. Netanyahu's message was that he's the only one with his powerful friends to protect Israelis from Iran and the Palestinians. In a close race, he upped the ante by promising to annex the occupied Jordan Valley, around a third of the land Palestinians want for a state. It was an extravagant gambit to keep the votes of the Israeli right. In the valley, it's harvest time for date farmers, Palestinians and Israelis who've settled here since it was captured in the 1967 war. Haidar Madat, a Palestinian farmer, says he was scared by the Prime Minister's promise of annexation.
Where is the peace that he's talking about? Netanyahu, he wants to take our land, and we live from it.
Annexation will be off the agenda if Mr. Netanyahu can't form a government after all the votes are counted. On walkabout in Tel Aviv, this could be the politician the Prime Minister fears most once the coalition negotiations start. Polls suggest his party, called Israel Our Home, has made significant gains. This man, Avigdor Lieberman, may become the kingmaker after the election. His party might control the balance of power when it comes to forming the next governing coalition. One important factor, though, he used to be a major ally of the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, and now they're opponents, even enemies. Late in the night, long after the exit polls, Prime Minister Netanyahu appeared in front of his supporters. They had been hoping for a celebration. But if the polls are correct, the end of the Netanyahu era could be in sight. Jeremy Bowen, BBC News, Tel Aviv.
So let's discuss this further with Noura Erakat. She's a human rights attorney and author and joins us now from our Washington studio. Noura, first of all, your reaction to these early results, exit polls?
I think there's a lot to be said analytically about the polls and what it means for Israel's domestic considerations. But what's most important as a Palestinian watching this is that the 5 million Palestinians who will endure Israel's governance in the aftermath of these elections were not allowed to cast a vote today, which should tell us everything we need to know about Israel, as well as the international community's normalization of its racist exclusion of Palestinians. Consider the Jordan Valley annexation, for example. That's in the West Bank. There are 3.7 million Palestinians in the West Bank. This is affecting their lives. 60,000 Palestinians in the Jordan Valley. They have no say in what happens there. As to the blue and white versus the Likud right now, it's basically very little difference between them except in rhetoric. Blue and white, in fact, when Netanyahu announced that he would and promised that he would annex the Jordan Valley, said that he stole that idea from them. So this isn't about two alternatives in terms of the fate of the peace process or the future of peace or the future of Israel. This is about Likud, which is a right-wing religious party, and about Blue and White, which is a right-wing secular party. And it spells doom for Palestinians regardless of how we cut it. And it hasn't even been discussed, which is very telling.
But I don't know if you're able to hear, but we just heard from a Palestinian in the Jordan Valley who said how scared he was of that annexation policy. Is it at least much less likely now that that will be acted upon and that people like that can rest a little easier in the Jordan Valley?
So two things to note about this. There is de facto annexation of the Jordan Valley anyways. Palestinians do not have access to 90% of the Jordan Valley, which is under closed military zones, nature preserves, settlements, where 11,000 settlers have access to 6 times as much water as the 60,000 Palestinians. So with or without annexation, Palestinians do not have access to their lands, which the World Bank has called the Palestinian breadbasket, that would give them a yield of $1.6 billion annually if they had access to Dead Sea minerals as well as to the water resources in order to produce agriculture. So as a matter of fact, Palestinians already don't have access. As a matter of law, the fact that this depends on which Israeli leader will be elected in terms of whether or not the Jordan Valley will be annexed is a travesty, because it's a clear and unequivocal violation of the prohibition on the acquisition of territory by force. Why are we leaving it to an election and to an Israeli leader to decide what international law has already prohibited? So yes, the Palestinian farmer has every right to be fearful, but the greatest fear comes from the apathy of the international community that has written this off as a domestic issue rather than an affront to the entire international community and world order, frankly.
Noura, earlier on you talked about the Palestinians, of course, who weren't able to vote, but it does look like Arab Israelis have gone to the polls in larger numbers than previously seen. The projections between 11 and 13 seats for the unified Arab parties. Would that be a significant shift in your eyes?
I think what is significant is that the Palestinian Israelis have rehabilitated the joint list in order to demonstrate their unity and have demonstrated that they are the 3rd largest coalition. It's also telling that had Blue and White allied with the joint list, which Ayman Odeh offered to him, that they would have been in a clear majority right now to win these elections, and yet the Blue and White party refused, specifically because its base refuses to enter into any kind of alliance with Palestinians, refuses to enter into any discussions about ending the occupation, refuses to enter into any discussion about annulling the nation-state law. So it's very exciting that the joint list has increased and demonstrated its power, but the fact that they're the 3rd largest coalition and yet will not be part of any government arrangement tells us again what we need to know about Israel's racist exclusionary policies, where they'd rather not have a majority in government rather than have to make an alliance with Palestinians.
OK, Noura Erakat, we have to leave it there, but thank you very much for your time.